Did you ever think that cooking a pancake is sort of like preparing to go on a trip? Well, let me show you how. Imagine that your family comes to you and says, "We're going to go on a family adventure. Go and pack for a trip. And do not forget anything." You probably have some questions. What would you want to know? Well, you obviously can't decide if you've forgotten anything unless you know where you're going and all the other details. So what if your parents tell you that you're going to Florida for a week to wrestle alligators? Can you visualize it? From that mental image, you might start to make a list of the things that you need. Go ahead and name some of them. Let's say you've started packing, you place your items in your suitcase, all is going well, and then you quickly realize that all these items are going to fill about 6 suitcases, and your parents remind you that you only get to bring 1. So you have to pull everything out and rethink what to bring. You've got a constraint that you need to meet. So in this way, packing is a lot like the engineering design process. This is a process where we start with things like asking questions. We imagine, we brainstorm, then we start planning. We create things, we improve those things, and this is a cycle that goes back and forth until we meet our goal, the thing here at the center. The engineering design process is something that engineers of all types use. There are actually a lot of different types of engineers in real life. In fact, there even are engineers called packing engineers that help make sure that all of our materials that we buy arrive to us safe, and in the case of food, fresh. There are engineers that are even for things like food. Food companies, let's say when they want to design a new candy bar, they employ engineers to come up with the recipe. Maybe they want to make sure that the criteria are that the chocolate on the outside is really yummy, but doesn't melt and get all over your hands. The engineer is going to have to use their knowledge of chemistry and food to make that happen. As food engineers together, we are going to design the perfect pancake. What stage do you think we should begin in this engineering design process? I agree. I think we should ask some questions here to figure out what criteria define the perfect pancake. So go ahead and look at these different pancakes on the screen here and think about what criteria you should use to decide whether or not you've met your goal of making the perfect pancake. You might have come up with something like the pancakes need to be fluffy, but remember that the criteria need to be measurable, so we can't just say fluffy. How will you tell that one of these pancakes is fluffier than the other? Well, you've got to find some way to measure it. That's the key to a criteria. When we're thinking about our perfect pancakes, we might come up with 3 criteria like these. The pancake needs to be fluffy, and we can measure that by the pancake height. The pancake needs to be golden brown, a delicious golden brown color that we can measure with a color comparison chart that we'll look at next time. And the pancake needs to be delicious, and we can measure that by tasting them. These are our criteria for success. Now, we're almost ready to go ahead and plan our recipe out. But in order to do that, I think we need to ask a few more questions about the ingredients so that we really understand them. I'm actually going to give you one additional criteria, that we need to make this a classroom-safe pancake. That means that we need to be aware that students have gluten allergies, dairy allergies. We need to make sure there are no food safety issues like spoiled milk or eggs, so we need to avoid using those materials. And we want this to be a healthy pancake. So I'm going to impose on you some constraints on the ingredients that you're allowed to use. You're only going to be able to use whole wheat flour, oat flour, water, baking powder, applesauce, banana puree, and or vanilla. Those are the ingredients that we've got. So what combination of these ingredients is going to help get us to our goal? Remember, we want fluffy, golden brown, and delicious. You might remember in our first lesson, we mixed up different mystery powders and different things happened. Sometimes exciting things, sometimes not. Well, we want to think about when we mix these specific ingredients, will there be any chemical reactions? How can we tell? How will those chemical reactions change the properties of our ingredients and help us accomplish our goals of fluffy, golden brown, and delicious pancakes? We're going to have to be on the lookout for unusual changes when we mix certain combinations of these ingredients together. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's explore a little bit. Get out 4 different cups, and in each one of them, put a scoop of these different combinations. Wheat flour and water, oat flour and water, baking powder and water, and baking powder and wheat flour. and then really notice what happens. Let's keep track in a data table of what happens, whether or not there's evidence of a chemical reaction, and what role we think that this mixture, this combination is playing in making that pancake work and making it fluffy, golden brown, or delicious. You're hopefully starting to see that some of these have evidence of chemical reactions like fizzing when you add baking powder and water together, or even the thickness of wheat flour and oat flour. And you might notice that there's a little bit of a difference in terms of how thick they get. Even if you use the same quantity of flour and the same quantity of water, that's because these two flours have different material properties. They come from different sources. And you might also notice that certain things like baking powder and wheat flour, together, when you mix those, nothing interesting happens. Those two materials don't really interact directly. Well, once we know about our ingredients, we need to start thinking about how much of each ingredient we should use. For example, should we try this combination? A 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, a cup of flour, and a gallon of water? That sounds a little bit like too much water. Or this one, anybody who knows about baking knows this is kind of a funny one. 2 cups of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of flour, and a 1/4 teaspoon of water. That's not going to make good pancake batter. Let's talk about some realistic pancake batter ratios. Come up with a plan and describe how you might come up with the perfect ratio, the perfect balance of these different ingredients. You might have come up with something like this, taking a fixed amount of flour and baking powder to start, and then varying the amount of water, looking at which is most like a batter that we've seen before, which looks like it will contain the baking powder bubbles the best. It's time to actually try things out again. So get 3 cups and try out these 3 different combinations and let me know which one you think is best. Fire up your griddle because you're going to take your preferred test batter and cook it right now, and then let me know what happens. Here's my test pancake after I finished cooking. It did indeed fluff up a fair amount, but I don't know if we have created the perfect pancake yet. We got fluffy, but we failed miserably on golden brown, and also delicious. Well, next time we head to improve. What will you do to improve your pancake?